Burning on bone presents a unique set of challenges, but the results can be well worth the effort. Perhaps the most difficult part is preparation. I used beef bone for this project, which I got from the butcher's shop. Select bone that is thick enough and has enough area to cut your project shape from. Once the bone is cut down to size, you'll need to boil it for a considerable amount of time. Now this will depend on the size of the bone and how much fat is on it, but boil it until the bone is clear of meat and fat. When the bone is clean, you can then trace your project shape on it. I used Word for Windows to find my initial shape. I then printed it out, put it on the bone, and put graphite paper between it and the bone to transfer the pattern. Once the transfer was done, I then used a scroll saw to cut out the shape, and I sanded the edges to smooth them out. I still found my bone was a little bit dark in colour, so I used some bleach and soaked the bone overnight to lighten it. I then let it dry naturally before giving it a final sand and polishing it with aluminium oxide. The bone is now ready to burn on. Transferring the pattern was simply a matter of printing out the design and then transferring it to the surface with some graphite paper. The first thing I noticed about bone burning is, much like ivory burning, it's incredibly sticky to burn on. The nib tends to grab and isn't easily dragged across the surface. Because of this, I found some of my lines were quite uneven, so what I did is take the nib and go back over those lines, pushing in on the sections that need filling in. After a while I did start to manage to burn longer, neat lines, but I did find that I had to keep my pressure quite light, and I also had to have an incredibly hot nib to do this. I started playing around trying to experiment how I'd fill in areas of tone such as the horns and other areas, and I found that a writing nib was quite sticky and almost impossible to move in a consistent manner. So what I did is decided to use stippling as a technique of filling in the toned areas. Because the bone is polished so smoothly, the resulting transfer is easily erased by fingertips, so because of this I decided to burn the entire outline of the buffalo before proceeding too much further. Notice when I'm outlining the head that I'm using a staggered, uneven outward stroke. Because the edge of an animal's coat, particularly a buffalo, is not a solid even line, I don't want to burn it with a solid even line. That would look unnatural. So I'm using a staggered stroke to give it a shaggy appearance and a broken edge. As well as outlining the main areas of the head, I'm also outlining the different sections of the coat. These are usually areas where the hair changes texture or length. To burn tiny areas like the eye, I turned my skew upside down and burnt with the very tip. To burn as dark as possible in areas like the nose, I let the tip stay in one place for a longer period of time. Burning the coat of a buffalo is a bit of a tricky thing. It's sort of shaggy and all over the place. So what I decided to do was burn each individual clump of hair to give it some sort of structure before I burnt over any areas that I needed darkening. Once I established the clumps of hair, I could then go over and darken the areas that needed it. I could also start establishing some of the shadow by darkening areas of hair that lay below others. Adding shadow to your work helps it become more realistic. It creates a real sense of depth. As I go, I'm starting to add more texture to the coat by dragging out some of the long fringes, and I'm also strengthening the darkness of some of the hair clumps. At this stage I can also start darkening some of the coat where needed. I'm starting to fill in the hair around the face. Now the hair on the face is quite short, so in keeping with this, I'll keep my strokes short. I start by burning this coat in quite a light tone, and then I add to it to establish darker tones where I need to. The hair between the face and the shag is actually medium, so I'm going to lengthen my stroke a little bit to try and match that length of hair. Once again, the hair around the nose is extremely short, so I'm almost stippling it. I burnt the fluffy head of the buffalo by pulling my strokes outward. Notice how I always turn my work to comfortably pull my strokes towards me. After a little bit more tweaking, the last job is to sign my initials. I'm doing this with a minute ball writing tip. All in all, I'd have to say I really enjoyed burning on bone. It was very challenging though, and it has got some cons. The cons are it's messy preparation, it's very sticky to burn, it's limited in the size of the work you can do, and it's a very hot burn. The pros are it's easily obtained, it looks like ivory, it's heavy and luxurious in its appearance, and it's a very unique thing to burn on.